Well, Daredevil's back, finally continuing the mystery of why so many red lights are on in New York City all the damn time. Is that why they call it a red light district? Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well because I am here to review the latest MCU Disney Plus series and the continuation / reboot of the Netflix Daredevil show. This one titled Daredevil Born Again. And oh boy, I have been very excited for this show. It's actually one of the few projects in the MCU that I had any level of hype for at this point. And it's mainly just comes down to the fact that I am really pumped to see Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio go head to head yet again, because their dynamic on the original Netflix show was absolute freaking perfection. I was not in love with the Daredevil show as much as other people were. Actually, Jessica Jones season 1 was my personal favorite of all the Netflix MCU stuff, but they in their show together were always amazing, and Vincent D'Onofrio in particular was just born for this role. And while I have gotten little bits and pieces of Vincent D'Onofrio in the Hawkeye show and the Echo show that I've enjoyed for the most part, I didn't enjoy the shows, but I enjoyed him in them. His Kingpin in those shows never really met the heights of the menace that he had in the Daredevil show. So I was really pumped to see him finally go up against Charlie Cox again to see if we can recapture that just weight of his character, the sense of imposing menace and just the interesting sort of complexity that he brings to the role of being like a very self-pitying guy and yet very intense as well. And I think he plays that well off of Charlie Cox's very Catholic guilt sort of character. And I think they sort of bring out the worst in each other and the best for on screen. So it was really pumped for that, but it was also sort of curious to see what this show is going to do with everything else. Because I knew that I had almost no doubt that was going to be a strong part of the show, and it is in this premiere, and we'll get to it. But the rest of it, I was sort of like, what is this going to be? Because MCU shows have been fairly up or down, with most being down. Only a few standouts like Loki being really big ones. So I was curious what this was going to bring. And ultimately, I am generally positive on this 2-episode premiere, with a few caveats and things that I am worried about, or more just sort of like, all right, let's see where this is going to go. And generally when I say that about an MCU show, it does not end well for me, but there are signs of hope for this one. I think the biggest thing with this premiere episode that I want to highlight first and foremost is that it just has style that MCU shows have not had in our MCU generally has not had in a long time. Like, the MCU just has like a house style. It's become a big talking point at this point of how everything in the MCU just kind of looks very samey. And this show just does not. Right down to the fact that I think they definitely use film for some of the BB sections where we get the journalist on the street bits. They might be using film, like actual like film for the rest of the stuff, or at least adding some grain. Just the way the camera is, they use the camera and the filters they have on the camera, just add a sense of grit and grime that even the Netflix shows sometimes didn't achieve with their like sort of more glossy sheen that Netflix kind of also likes to have on all of its shows. So just the cameras they're using, or whatever, or however they're filming this is allowing that to feel just more grounded and gritty. And the camera movements and angles are also fantastic, and I really appreciated that. We also are getting a lot more brutal action than we're used to in the MCU, but certainly not in the Netflix Daredevil show, and they make that very clear right off the bat, where we get Poindexter, Bullseye coming back, having no holds barred, and getting into a huge fight with Matt in another one of the series' classic oneer shots, big fight sequences that we got all the way back in the Netflix show. And I have to say, this one I think is one of the weaker of the ones that we got compared to the Netflix show. However, I will take it as like a good statement piece for the show, that it wants to sort of harken back to that and what we all loved about that show. But I also think there are things to love in this one too, in that it doesn't necessarily always focus on the fight, but focuses on the civilians in the area, and especially Foggy dying in that scene when it pulls out and then pulls back in. And I think, and I also love the sound design of it as well. Like, there was just a tenseness throughout that whole scene, leading all the way up to it as well, and even going into the rest of the show. Like, there's just a pulsating tenseness in the sound design that I really love. You just get a sense of New York, in the place of New York in the show. So just shouts out to all the technical aspects of the show. It's something the MCU desperately needs, and I'm glad for that. One of the things that I didn't like is that they pitch the show as kind of continuation of the Netflix show. But the series starts off with us seeing our main characters from that show, including Matt and Foggy, only to immediately kill Foggy and then send Paige off to San Francisco, sort of kind of eliminating them from the picture. Maybe she'll come back at some point, but really they're just sort of gone. And we also very quickly reintroduce Poindexter and Bullseye and then get rid of him very quickly. Again, maybe he'll come back, but it's sort of just they come back and are dealt with, and it feels like that's the show saying like, hey, we dealt with some of the stuff from that show, but now we're kind of ignoring it and just kind of bringing back Fisk. And it feels kind of weird because even I was sort of like, wait, what was the dynamic with Bullseye again? Why was he upset? Like, I had to go back and remember a little bit. It's been a hot minute and I didn't rewatch the show. So it's like enough to make me be like, wait, where were we with that? But not enough to make me really feel like it's continuing it. And I sort of question like, who exactly is that bit for? Like, I get they want to kind of gut punch us with Foggy, which is I have mixed feelings on, but at least it's something that they're trying to do and trying to take a risk on. But it also just feels weird that they're sort of leaning on pulling from the show and not really continuing it either. So I have mixed feelings there. And then also on that front, because we sort of get rid of those characters very quickly, we're introduced to some new ones, new characters like Cherry, the ex-cop who now works as a detective for Matt and his law firm and things like that. And as a result, we don't feel like I don't feel like we have as much as an emotional connection that we did with them as we did the other characters from the show, and sort of like we're trading down in a way, just so we can immediately get to the Matt Murdock of it all. Because at least seasons 1 of Daredevil, the Netflix series, took time to introduce us to Foggy and Paige and their interaction with Matt and how they all connected with each other and how they had feelings for each other and cared about each other. But here we're just sort of introducing these new characters and then we're right on to the races with the plot of the show. We don't really get enough time to like sit with these new characters to really understand their emotional relationships to Matt. I get what they serve plot-wise, but emotionally, I don't think they land as strong. And so I'm kind of a little bit sad on that front, and I think that that's sort of a disappointment for the show generally. However, this does bring me to the Vincent D'Onofrio of it all, who is a returning element and is just absolutely on his A game here. Like I said, he is back to form that he wasn't fully at in Hawkeye and Echo, and here he just works very well. Every scene with him is so good, and again, the show just captured that wonderful self-pitying and yet strongman aspect that he sort of exudes. His sort of like his emotion with Vanessa and how he sort of like is unwilling to really confront his deteriorating relationship with her, how he tries to exude this sort of like I'm the man for New York City kind of vibe. And I think the illusion is very clearly trying to pull from Donald Trump, in that he's like a very strong, kind of gives off the strong man, I'll fix I'll make New York great again energy, while also just being kind of a weakling shit person and a sort of feeble man behind the scenes, sort of all facade that is there. I think he is certainly a much more competent character than Donald Trump is in real life. So I don't think it's a necessarily one for one, but it is there, and I think that that's ultimately what kind of makes this work a little bit for me, because I think it would be a bit. I mean, the MCU has wandered into discussing Trump territory before with things like Secret Invasion, and we all know how that worked out. And at least this allows the show to kind of allude to a lot of those dynamics without it feeling necessarily like it's trying to beat you on the head with the Trump stuff. Because frankly, I'm dealing with enough of Trump in real life right now. And while I'm fine with talking about the aspects of that, I don't necessarily need a Marvel show to really go into it, because I don't expect Marvel of all things to really get that right. So like allowing the show to really focus on Fisk as a unique blend of that, I think really allows this to work. And the other thing that I'm sort of curious on this, what the show is doing, and I'm not entirely sure I want to see where it goes. But clearly this show's themes are trying to deal less with like the Trumpian aspect of all of it and more to do with the law and order aspect of it. And that's certainly something that's not even just, a topic in Republican stuff and Trumpy stuff, but also a very New York City thing with things like Eric Adams, a Republican guy, being a cop. Check out his shit, because Eric Adams is a piece of shit mayor and fucking hate him. But yeah, so I think they're drawing a little bit from that aspect. But again, again, in a unique way, because Fisk is not a cop himself and even on the outs with the cops. And we also have Matt sort of dealing with cops and police brutality with his case that he takes up with this ex-vigilante sort of guy that he sort of is trying to protect and sort of get off the hook, and dealing with like corrupt cops who are willing to just beat up a guy, things like that. So like I appreciate that there's some criticism of the cops going on here, and we even start off the first scene of the episode where they're at that sort of cop retirement party, and they sort of say, yeah, we're the thin blue line, and there's this question about like vigilantes, are they the ones to save us, are the cops ones to save us, who protects us, those sort of questions. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the show landing on it yet, because we could talk about vigilantes also being another form of police brutality, or not necessarily police brutality, it's not institutional brutality, but some level of like, we can beat the shit out of criminals instead of trying to actually deal with the underlying problem of crime, which is more systemic in our country, which is the big problem with Eric Adams, for example. He's always like tough on crime sort of guy. So I'm curious to see if the show's going to get into that nuance, or if it's just sort of cops versus vigilantes, which I think is a question that like is not without merit in the sort of superhero world, but I'm curious to see what parallels they'll be making in terms of what the show's trying to say and what statement it's trying to say with these ideas in terms of a real world context. On that note, I really love the thematic connection between Matt and Kingpin, in that they're both sort of trying to reinvent themselves. Matt sort of has given up the Daredevil life after almost killing Bullseye after Foggy's death, and Kingpin sort of like wanting to try and reinvent himself and his legacy and try to reconnect with Vanessa. So he's not necessarily trying to be a better person like Matt is, but he is trying to reinvent who he is and how he goes about things. And I think that that's kind of an interesting connection between the two of them, and is interesting to see where they're going to butt heads, as they sort of obviously will when Matt is going to don the Daredevil suit. And so we get this question of like, is he sort of the vigilante? Is he out of the law and order? But then also law and order is not standing up for anyone. The cops aren't standing up for anyone. Wilson Fisk is certainly just trying to protect himself. And no one's actually looking out for the small guy like Matt is. And so I think that all of those interesting ideas will sort of, it's a good starting place for a lot of the questions that this season I think is hoping to delve into. And I also really love the question of Matt understanding Kingpin better than anyone else. Like, Kingpin's trying to reinvent himself, but Matt knows him because he knows himself that he may not be able to change either, that he may not be able to be born again. He may not be able to shed the Daredevil suit, just like Wilson Fisk might not be able to change. And there's that wonderful moment where they're both talking to each other, and like one of the New Yorkers sort of bangs on the glass, and Fisk sort of looks at him annoyed, but then puts on a smile. He puts up the veneer and then turns back, and it just falls away. And he knows that Matt saw all of that, even though he's a blind man. Like, I love that like level of like, Matt sees through me, even the facade that I put on for everyone else, and they get each other on that level. So like, really great acting when these two are in the room, just absolutely pitch perfect. One of the things that happened with the show that I was curious about was there was another version of the show that they actually shot a lot of before they said it's not working, we're redoing it. And one of the things that they said about that version of the show before they just redid Born Again was the fact that it was much more of a legal procedural. And I was kind of disappointed that they got rid of that, because I liked the idea of a more legal procedural show. It was actually one of the aspects of She-Hulk that I really enjoyed on a comedic aspect. And I was curious to see a more serious take on that as well. And so I'm glad to see that the show is not entirely abandoning it in this form, because we do get some interesting stuff with like him defending this vigilante guy, White Tiger I think is his name, awkward name, and we get to see those scenes where like Matt goes in with the judge and argues like, look, he didn't have his amulet, so we don't need to introduce that he's a White Tiger, the vigilante, into evidence. Like that level of stuff is just kind of interesting, especially on a very serious level, and them just taking it like straight faced, I thought was really kind of interesting. So all of that stuff is really working for me. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I am enjoying the dynamic between just everything with Vincent D'Onofrio. Charlie Cox's stuff he's always fantastic, but he's placed into dynamics and situations that I sort of oscillate on where I find it interesting or not. But ultimately, I am kind of very in on the style of show. I'm curious to see what the show is going to be doing and saying. I think that this is a very strong start for the show, and I think there is potential here for this to go into being one of the stronger MCU entries. That all being said, and I've said this almost every time with every MCU show that I have reviewed on this channel, the MCU tends to generally start strong and end really, really badly. So we'll see how it goes. I think the only show for me that ended strong was Loki, I think. I liked Loki seasons 1 and 2 and both of their endings. I had more issues with Loki season 2 than season 1, but still I enjoyed both shows' endings very, very well. Both seasons' endings. But every other MCU show, I have to go back through and think, but I think for most of them, they start strong and very much peter out, especially at the end. And you can varies by how much. I mean, Falcon and the Winter Soldier being one of the worst ones, and, you know, other ones sort of being varying levels of degrees of like, that was fine to, that was awful. But there's very few standouts as great. So we'll see if Daredevil Born Again can, I think, really, really capture that. But ultimately, I do think that this is a strong one. I'm curious to see where it's going to go. We have a couple other superfluous characters here, too, I should mention. We have the therapist who's sort of dating Matt. We sort of get a couple other things here and there. But ultimately, I think it's hard for me to delve into them all that much just because they're so kind of superfluous characters and I don't have a lot of tie into them at the moment. And so again, that's kind of maybe a knock against the show is like I want to get a little bit more inside these superfluous ancillary characters. Like we also have BB the reporter, who is the I think she said the granddaughter or uncle of the reporter from the Daredevil show on Netflix. I forget what she said her relationship was in this scene with Fisk. I actually really like her, and I like those sort of man on the street interviews that she does. I think she's one of the more interesting elements here that I hope we get more of. Like we only get one scene to really delve into her when she sort of confronts Fisk and show how smart she is. So I want to see more of her character. But again, we're not giving a lot of emotionality. A lot of these characters are here to serve plot function. Like that sort of like young Republican character too is sort of behind Fisk. Like they're interesting, but they aren't given a lot of depth at the moment. And so it's hard to really latch into them. So hopefully we'll get more development of them. And it's kind of why I wish we had a Foggy or Paige around to give us some more deep relationships outside of just the Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio one. Because that's really the only... and the Vanessa and Kingpin relationship as well is kind of one of those stronger ones too. And I kind of really enjoy that dynamic between the two of them. Of her kind of being like, I handled everything by myself. I'm good. And now I don't know how to feel about you and you running away. Like that's an interesting dynamic for especially the two of them having been like a power couple in previous series or seasons, I should say. So yeah, strong start, but one that is a little bit bumpy, but one I am definitely on board for and excited to see play out. But what did you think of Daredevil Born Again? I'd love to hear all your thoughts. I mean, beyond all that, I hope you, my friends, if I can speak today, live long and prosper.